This is Insight. If the whole fake news phenomenon isn't worrying enough, spare a thought for millennials, young people aged 18 to 24, 90% of whom only use social media to keep themselves informed and as a way of reading the latest headlines. Critics believe this era of digital misinformation is worrying and has some serious implications. Insight's Tag Enright tells us more.
So I get my news from Snapchat.
Research suggests most of us now get most of our news from social media.
They make it fun to read.
Yeah.
Instead of like newspapers where it's just words everywhere.
It's simple.
And for the youngest of audiences, traditional news sources are so last century.
The only time I usually do is when I'm asked to, or
That's
I have
true.
to.
Traditional news outlets do accuracy better, but they're not as entertaining to read.
So I've come to this London college.
Hello there.
To hear from the next generation of voters. And I'm joined by Brett, who studies the impact of social media.
I want to talk to you about a couple of headlines which appeared in social media. The first one was about Hillary Clinton, and it said that in 2013 she gave this quote: "I would like to see people like Donald Trump run for office. They're honest and they can't be bought." So what are your thoughts on that?
Taking into account what she thinks about Trump now, it's as if she could have been sarcastic.
That headline wouldn't have much of influence on me because I do not see Hillary Clinton as being the most honest politician, and nor Donald Trump.
What if I told you she did give a speech in 2013 saying she thought a businessman would make a great president, a rich one who can't be bought, but she never mentioned Donald Trump by name?
I think that the reason why they put Donald Trump's name on it is because he's been circulating in the media as a businessman. And so even if Hillary didn't mention his name, he was the only businessman that's been so popularized.
Maybe that would have probably been done by Donald Trump supporters, because that would make Donald Trump look good.
As a journalist, you should have the duty to provide true information.
The next story I'm going to talk to you about is one about Donald Trump, and it was a quote which was attributed to him from 1998. It says he told People magazine, "If I were to run, I'd run as a Republican. They're the dumbest group of voters in the country."
So he said that 18 years ago.
That's what the thing said.
That's actually very essential, because he actually did run as a Republican.
This quote must not have been highlighted enough for people with logic to vote for him.
I do see Donald Trump saying that because he's such a controversial person.
But what if I told you that quote is a complete fabrication? Donald Trump never gave an interview in 1998 to People magazine. It was completely made up and shared hundreds of thousands of times on social media.
The quote being entirely fabricated makes you feel like an idiot, because essentially you read it and you believed it.
Makes us think that someone deliberately did that, because maybe they have a certain view about Republicans voting for him.
You're going to see other headlines, and you're going to be looking for headlines that highlight him in the wrong color. And that's almost like the domino effect.
Okay, well, let's get Brett's opinion about all this. Is that fairly typical of the way in which people digest fake news on social media?
Yeah, so what was interesting there was you presented these fictitious headlines. The legitimacy of the headlines wasn't questioned. Instead, what took place was an attempt to try and assimilate this knowledge within existing knowledge.
These students have recent experience of another divisive act of democracy, the UK's Brexit referendum, in which the winning side made this promise to voters and swiftly backtracked afterwards.
Do you think it's right that politicians speak directly to you via things like social media without having a trained journalist to challenge the accuracy of the points they're making?
Everything is filtered. It can be either in a bad way or in a good way.
Having someone like a journalist or reporter asking is that really correct or not would actually make us think and question if it actually is.
Although they may make false claims, it's best to get it from the actual politician himself, so you can make the judgment on it. Whether it is right or wrong, that's entitled to your opinion.
When they canvass you on the street, you have the opportunity to ask questions back, and it's in dialogue that you're actually able to co-construct understanding and sort of negotiate misunderstandings.
And social media users are curating their own news agendas by linking with people who share their views and by helping the platform's algorithms recognize what they want to read.
I usually follow people who are funny to me, same personality, have same interests.
Facebook thinks you want to read things that conform to your views.
Before you told me this, I didn't know that there was an algorithm that filters news articles.
Do you think people like reading things that match their own views?
I do believe that people like to stay in their comfort zone because usually we do not like to be challenged.
When the internet began, there was this kind of democratic dream that you'll be able to bring all these different perspectives together into one place. And what we're actually seeing is that the gatekeepers of the internet, so they're actually trying to do the opposite. They're trying to tailor the internet to the individual. When you have this kind of maybe slightly distorted perception that the norm is actually aligning with your view, you're less likely to sort of critically reflect on your own view because you don't need to integrate all those different perspectives.
This is how most of tomorrow's voters are consuming debate and discussion. It makes sober reading for democracy's next generation. Ty Genwright, reporting for Insight.
Well, to discuss that further, I'm joined by Brett Heisman, who you saw in the film, a doctoral student at the London School of Economics, the Department of Psychology and Behavioural Science. And still with us, Professor of Journalism George Brock from the City University in London. Brett, the fact that it's such a narrow range of opinion that these millennials we just featured in our film, do none of them want to reach out beyond that comfort zone of their Facebook friends?
No, exactly. So this was really interesting. I think what we saw in the video there was when the girls were presented with fake news, they didn't question the legitimacy of that source. They actually tried to assimilate that knowledge into their existing belief system and make sense of it according to what their belief system was. So it was interesting that they didn't question the origin of that news, even though it didn't seem to concur with what that had happened in the media.
That's quite a fundamental resetting of the clock, isn't it, of the provider and the consumer?
Yeah, but I'm not sure that we have to panic right now. People develop according to what they learn, if you see what I mean. And if you do teach people that something that is apparently from a reliable brand online isn't necessarily 100% reliable, they will adapt their behavior as things go on. We're at a don't forget, we're at an extremely early stage of discovering what the scale of fraud in news can be. There is an established set of people who people will broadly believe. Now people can present it as if they're doing it. That does change things, but I don't think it necessarily wrecks or ruins them because people will learn and adapt.
Is there any impetus, do you think, Brett, on those who, at least to the conduit of this, they might not be the originating publishers, like your Facebooks, like Google, like other social media sites? Is there a pressure on them to filter news for accuracy?
I think now there's a pressure on them, but it's a very fine line between regulation and opening up the door to censorship. And I think that's
the cry that goes up,
yeah,
isn't it? You're censoring our news.
Exactly, and Facebook has said quite specifically that they don't want to be a media organization. However, in terms of how they tailor the news, someone's individual news feed towards their interests is arguably already a form of regulating the news. So there are some important questions being asked. I think also bear in mind that Facebook is very much a trial and error project. It has big consequences when things go potentially wrong, and so now we have this story of how much fake news was potentially out there during the US election. But they're trying to solve these problems as they occur. It's just that the consequences can be quite big. So it will be interesting to see what their reaction is following this story of how much fake news was actually involved in the US election.
Should they have to bother, though, George? Because, I mean, certainly, for instance, in the United Kingdom, you can buy a range of newspapers from a range of political opinions, and their political affiliations, while not stamped in great big letters, are well known. So the audience knows what to get. In the same way, can we not develop a sophisticated readership of social media?
Well, I think we will. I think that's exactly what is now likely to start happening. But I don't think that entirely absolves companies like Facebook of responsibility for passing things on. Facebook is, after all, by some measure, the most informationally powerful corporation we've ever had on this planet.
Yes.
They have a distributional power that outstrips anything we've ever seen before. So I think they do have some responsibilities to account for the stuff that they're passing on. And if they're passing on stuff with false authority behind it, in other words, claiming that something comes from publication X when in fact it just comes from a fraudster in Macedonia, they may I think they do have responsibility to point that out. I do not want them arbitrating the truth of things. That is, as Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook quite rightly says, that's a massively complicated task, and I don't think it would help for them to be trying to do that. But they can put signals on things and say, from that source, almost everything has been lies and fraud. Read it if you want to, but you might not want to believe it.
Well, it's a subject we're going to have to return to, I think. Brett Heisman and George Brock, thank you both very much indeed. That is all from me, Martin Stanford Insight team. We guarantee the news is, to our best efforts, accurate and true, and where we welcome differences of opinion. Until next time, goodbye.